I'm David Amano. We start this week with a world of satire and the drawings that can provoke both roaring laughter and fury. The events in France this week highlighted the dangers facing political cartoonists around the world. Today, we're focusing our attentions on the Middle East and the challenges cartoonists face there. With me here in the studio is Abdirahim Saeed of BBC Arabic and Turkish journalist with the BBC Seref Isler. Abdirahim, let me start with you. Tell us about Naji al-Ali, famous Palestinian cartoonist.
Yes, a famous Palestinian cartoonist who was assassinated in 1987 here in London. But despite this, he's still one of the most influential cartoonists whose works still live on in the Middle East. He's got a stock of iconic characters that still live on and are still relevant in today's world, in today's politics in the Middle East.
Characters like
Handala. It's like and Ali always mentioned that is based on him. And Handala is supposedly a 10-year-old kid, barefooted, downtrodden, but still hopeful of one day returning to his homeland, where he was, according to the Palestinian narrative, they were obviously put into exile and expelled from the land. So, but it grew more into a narrative of what's happening in the Arab world. So it's not just a running commentary on Palestinian affairs, but it's actually a running commentary on what's happening in the Arab world and issues such as the lack of democracy, oppression, and censorship, and poverty, and so on.
And what kind of... Who were the targets of his derision, his cartoon derision?
Yeah, so two main themes was always the war and the tensions with Israel and the relationship between the Israelis and the Palestinians. And another target has always been, Arab rulers and so on. I mean, and that took on a bit more relevance, especially after the events of 2011 when the Arab uprising started. And a lot of these cartoons have come back into circulation. If I can give one quick example. I mean, you've got Handala again talking to a cartoonist or a journalist is asking him, you know what, I've liked your article yesterday on democracy. What are you writing about today? And he sees him writing and he says to him, and the journalist asks him, I'm writing my will today.
So let me bring in Seref Isler here from BBC Turkish. When we talk about Turkish cartoonists, do you think they've become bolder or tamer over recent times?
I think overall Turkish media has become a bit tamer. It used to be a lot bolder. Over the years, with increasing these criticisms of increasing self-censorship and almost a interference in the freedom of press and the media in general in Turkey, and we saw these during the Istanbul protests especially, the Gezi protests in Turkey especially. I think overall media has become much more self-censoring and tamer, and I think to an extent caricatures used to be very bold. They are still pretty bold by Turkish standards.
So are these bold? The ones I'm looking at right now are from the magazine Le Mans and the magazine Penguin, and they're caricaturing Turkish President Tayyip Erdogan. Are they, I mean, by Turkish standards, well, let me just describe them. I mean, he's depicted here as several kinds of animals: a camel, frog, snake, elephant, giraffe. Actually, it looks like Tinker Tales on BBC's children's programmes. And then the other one, you've got him depicted as various vegetables. Is that hard-hitting, obscene, or very mild in Turkish values?
Well, actually, it is not really an insult to be drawing someone as a particular vegetable, and in this case, he's, for example, been drawn as an onion and a pepper and a turnip. This is not considered an insult. However, there's a background story, and one needs to understand that Turkish humour is very much like having a very mischievous kid in your house. It's about getting a kick out of someone's reactions. When he was first drawn as a cat, he sued the cartoonist, saying you can't depict the Prime Minister as a cat.
Why? What was offensive about a cat?
Well, there was nothing offensive about it, and to be honest with you, the court agreed that there was no case there, and the case was thrown out. But when the cartoonist saw that, and one needs to also understand that Turkish politicians can be a little bit too sensitive, when they saw just how sensitive he was to being drawn as a cat, they drew him as a bunch of animals in protest. When he sued that particular magazine, Penguin, for drawing him as a bunch of animals. Lehman drew him as a bunch of vegetables because he argued in court that it's not part of press freedom to be drawing the Prime Minister. He was the Prime Minister at the time.
And this is what often happens in the world of political satire, isn't it? I mean, we're talking about actions, legal actions against cartoonists, not the violence that we've seen in France this week, but often the legal action begins and then they draw back because it just gives them, the cartoonists, more ammunition because they go and draw about the legal action, right?
Absolutely, I completely agree. And one needs to also stress that Lehman and Penguin, although they they could come across as caricaturing the president or the ruling party most of the time, they don't actually. They take on any political establishment. They take on the leader of the opposition who entered the escalator from the wrong side. They took on another opposition leader who mispronounced the word for biscuit, and then his party, instead of making fun of the whole thing, decide to say, no, actually that is the correct way to pronounce it. So when people get too sensitive about things, they just decide to make fun of it.
Abdirahim, let's talk about sensitivities then. Jordanian cartoonist Emad Hajjaj, has he been upsetting people? I mean, how would you describe his cartoons?
A bit like Ali Naja again. I mean, is a running commentary for what's happening in Jordan, in his home country, but also across the Middle East. And he's been poking fun of different political issues and social issues. But one area where he always, a lot of cartoonists and self-censorship themselves is, for example, drawing the king of the country, for example, in Jordan. So, although he did that back in 1999, a few months after the king took to the throne, and he was in hot waters. He later claimed in some newspaper reports that he lost his job because of that. So
since then, does it mean there are areas that you can see he definitely won't go? I mean, okay, I'm looking at cartoon here. There's an interesting one here with President Assad of Syria, and it's got Vladimir Putin of Russia wheeling him sort of along in a chair, and also sort of keeping him on some kind of drip. There's one here of Mohamed Morsi, the former Islamist president of Egypt, who was deposed. He's depicted as King Kong holding onto the pyramids. Are those the sort of safe targets for Emad in Hajjaj, in that they're outside Jordan? He's not hitting at his own.
Yeah, of course. I mean, cartoons, just like articles, newspaper articles, are often printed within the constraints of local conditions. For example, it's much easier to draw political characters from outside your borders than inside your borders. So yeah, it's following what's happening in the region. It's in tune what's already been printed in articles in newspapers.
Seref and Abdirahim, this goes to both of you. Cartoons, what is their power? Do they have a bigger impact than what we do as reporters, journalists? What's for you is the essential difference between a cartoonist and a reporter, or are they completely different spheres of life? Seref?
I think they have a bigger impact than a lot of people would realise, because to go to my earlier answer about Turkish media self-censoring, as written articles became, or television or radio became self-censoring, you saw a boost in the caricatures being drawn. I think caricatures are much more fearless, and in many ways a simple drawing can reflect society or the political sphere a lot better than words.
Maybe it's also because you don't need a lot of education to follow a cartoon, do you?
True. I mean, it's often drawings and the part of the popularity of cartoons in the Middle East. I grew up with cartoons in the Middle East. I actually used to buy a particular weekly one, and people love it because you don't really need much words. It's open to interpretation, and that's part of the popularity where journalists can't get away writing certain things, and cartoonists can always draw things, and it's open to interpretation.
Thank you very much, Abdirahim Saeed and Seref Isler. A big subject which we have to leave there, but hope we'll cover it again in future. You're listening to The Fifth Floor.
Vous écoutez The Fifth Floor, présenté par David Amanor. Restez avec nous. Pour en savoir plus, allez sur internet bbcworldservice.com, The Fifth Floor.